Welcome everybody to the Center for AI Policy's Back to School special on education and AI. I am Jason Green-Lowe, the Executive Director of the Center for AI Policy. Our role is to watch out for the catastrophic risks that may come from artificial intelligence in the near to mid future. So we are concerned about threats to essential infrastructure, weapons of mass destruction, escalation of conflict, AI that could escape or evolve or replicate itself. And the way all this ties into education is that as recently as 5 years ago, the conventional wisdom was that AI and robotics would be confined to repetitive tasks. We'd be looking at moving boxes around in preparation for packaging or something that gets done the same way over and over again, something relatively mindless. And today we have AI in the classroom. We have AI designing curriculums. We have AI grading tests. We have AI writing successful answers to tests that get students through Harvard. And so if AI has gone from minimum wage jobs to graduating from Harvard in 5 years, where will it be 5 years from now? What's coming up down the road? We are urging Congress and the rest of government to be aware of and to begin preparing for some of the risks that could arise as artificial intelligence grows ever more powerful and ever more general purpose. Today, though, we're going to examine what's happening with AI in education right now. We have a panel of experts from many different areas of the educational field to discuss how AI is being used, what its benefits are, what its risks are, how to manage those, how to align them with the needs and values of our students and our communities. So I'm very pleased to welcome Michael Brickman from the Cicero Institute. He has been working in education reform and is the mastermind behind the skills-based hiring of Executive Order 13932, which replaced some of the gratuitous college degree requirements in the federal government with hiring based on skills and competencies. He also led educational policy for Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker and serves as an adjunct fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. Bethany Abbate is the manager of AI policy and for the Software and Information Industry Association. They're a trade association that brings together all kinds of people whose business is to deliver information, ranging from educators to publishers. And she has a robust background in policy analysis and regulatory consulting with a wide range of roles in both state and federal government. Dr. Punya Mishra is the Director of Innovative Learning Futures at Arizona State University. He's delivered at least one excellent TED Talk that I've seen, is a Master of Design-Based Educational Innovation, figuring out what it takes to build a classroom that can be understood, that meets people's needs, that connects with people and values their creativity. With over 62,000 citations of his work, he's one of the top 2% of cited scientists worldwide. And I'm pleased to see what his impressive public speaking skills will do for this panel.
And no pressure.
Yeah, no pressure. No pressure. And then Pati Ruiz. Dr. Pati Ruiz is the Senior Director of Edtech and Emerging Technologies at Digital Promise. Digital Promise is a catalyst for change in the educational system. They bring technology into schools and help the students and teachers there learn to use it effectively and learn more about what it means to use that technology effectively and where the best practices are. Before she ran the department, she was a senior research scientist there and also spent 16 years teaching middle school and high school Spanish and computer science and served as a school administrator. So I'm grateful to have her on the panel because it's much harder to accuse us of not having any real-world experience that way. I've got a variety of questions to kick us off with. Some of the panelists may answer them at greater length than others, depending on what they're most interested in and where their expertise is. After we go through some of those questions, we'll turn it over to questions from the audience. We will then pause for a brief photo opportunity, and then we'll have the room for a little while longer if people want to informally mingle. So, first question, I think we can just take this one from my right to my left, and then we'll sort of play off of each other. Please feel free to connect with each other's responses, agree, disagree. If there's something you want to add or something that reminds you of, I'm happy to have this be more of a conversation and less of a endless question and answer. My first discussion prompt is, what's the current state of AI in the classroom, right? What's the biggest change so far? What do you expect the biggest change to be in the school year that's starting right now? Where are we in terms of AI in the classroom, especially focused on things that might not be common knowledge for people who aren't currently in the classroom?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for having me here. Appreciate it, and it sounds like from your opener we might have some different views, so I appreciate you including views that are maybe contrary to your own. Look, AI has been disruptive in a lot of areas already, and education is no exception. And I think the way you look at that, it probably has a lot to do with whether you are generally an optimistic or pessimistic person overall. So sure, there are risks like any new technology, and there are disruptions that are going to change the way we do things. And some of those things, personally, I don't love either. But it is also going to happen one way or another. And we're seeing these AI tools disrupting the workforce, the way we do our jobs. And so if we want to prepare our young people to enter that world, we can do one of two things. We can pretend it's not going to happen. We can try to keep it out. We can try to use other technology to check if students are using it and make sure that they don't have the ability to incorporate AI tools into their schoolwork and then send them off into the world where AI is the reality. Or we can change the way that we deal with school. We can allow AI to be a tool that can help students, but also teachers, to take away some of the drudgery for them. And I think you're already starting to see some really exciting tools that are, maybe in the phase of early adoption for teachers, which is really exciting. But the thing that I think is most promising for AI in education is the idea that you could have a one-to-one tutor for every student, and you have the ability for, even if a student is growing up with challenges at home and maybe not going to a great school, they still have these tools that are out there that have the ability, doesn't mean they 100% will, but they have the ability to get every single student across the country, no matter their background, no matter what school they go to, at least up to a certain level through some of these adaptive learning, one-to-one tutoring types of modules that just never would have been possible and certainly not cost-effective in the past.
Thank you for having me. I want to echo a lot of Michael's points. I think we're aligned on this. It's important to recognize that AI has slowly been integrated into educational contexts already within the past 2 decades. And as AI continues to evolve rapidly, I think part of this is because of the technological advancement, but also because there's an increased demand for more efficiency in the classroom for teachers to be able to teach better, and also more demand for personalized learning solutions for students so that they can reignite their learning experience in new ways. And we've seen throughout history how the education sector has really reaped the benefits of technological innovation, going all the way back to the printing press in the 15th century, which really revolutionized education by making it a more affordable way to have increased access to information. This increased literacy rates, so we've seen a cause and effect in that way. This also occurred when we had the onset of television and radio, which expanded access to information to a broader spectrum of areas that maybe didn't have access to educational content before. And then, of course, computers and the internet have now brought about so many software capabilities that have kind of set the onset of these personalized learning tools that we're going to see expanded with AI. There's a couple of differences with these past examples, and then there's a couple of similarities that we see with the evolution of AI. So, we believe at SIIA, and in general, I believe that I think AI can really democratize access to educational resources and will continue to do so. And in these past examples, that was exactly what happened. We democratized access to educational resources. But in order for that to happen, we do have to have a role for policymakers and a collaborative approach between educators and industry in order to make this next phase happen in the educational context. Obviously, this brings some complexity that we've never seen before around considerations such as data privacy, cybersecurity, algorithmic bias, and other ethical considerations that I'm sure we'll get into today. But overall, I think we just need to look at the AI evolution as this next phase of opening the door for a lot of opportunity for both students and teachers.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me here today. I'm going to take a slightly different tack to the question in terms of what's happening in classrooms today in K-12 spaces and higher ed spaces. I think what we are seeing is what we see whenever any new technology or media comes along. We see it both the emancipation of humankind as well as the destruction of it, right? So you have this whole sort of polarized discussion that's going on. Within the education space, I think there are those who are seeing it proactively as something that can actually transform what they do, while others are really scared and worried. And I think in certain cases, justifiably so. At ASU, I'm really like sort of impressed by how, partly because I work there, but partly because I think Arizona State really does push the boundaries and how we think about new technologies and education at scale. So one of our principles is that of principled innovation, which is sort of thinking about the impact of this innovation at, when we start using these technologies and so on. So I think that's been a really powerful thing. So I think the space right now is reasonably chaotic, is how I would describe it. And I think the next year or two are going to sort of remain that way. But the other thing is, like, I'm also an academic, and so I can step back from this, and I've been in this field long enough. So certain questions arise in my mind about some of these things. So when we talk about personalized learning, personalized by whom, for whom? Like, if it is taking a curriculum that was decided by a bunch of people sitting in a room somewhere and saying, we are going to like help you step through the same curriculum, that's not really personalized. Because I think the power of AI can really be personalized at the level of what is my passion, what is my interest, and how can I now grow this? I see less of a discussion of that. One final point. I think there has been also a fundamental misunderstanding of what this technology is. I think when OpenAI first released ChatGPT into the world, we took it to be a smarter form of Google, which is going to give us the right answer. This technology, we have to recognize, is generative, which means it's making things up. And so what we call hallucinations is what it does normally. Everything it does is an hallucination. Sometimes it aligns with our thinking. We are like, wow, that was correct. Sometimes it doesn't. Then we're like, oh, we can fix that. Understanding that, I think, is incredibly important, because then it raises fundamental questions about, can we use it as a tutor, or should we use it as a thinking partner? I think those kinds of questions need to be asked and discussed. And I can go on and on. I'm a professor. I get paid to profess. So I will keep it short, and I'll let Pati tip up.
Thank you. Yes. How do I follow that? Thank you for having me as well. I'm very happy to be here. What we are seeing in practice as we work with district leaders, teachers, and students in the classroom is that folks are asking for guidance. We are being asked for guidelines and guardrails. I just finished a project on responsible use policies for districts in U.S. schools and U.S. school districts. And I'll be talking about that a little bit later. But primarily, folks are asking for guidelines, guardrails, as well as good examples of use of these technologies in learning settings. And as we know, as learning scientists, we can't speed up the processes that happen in the head, right? Learning is a slow process, and it will remain that way, and we need to continue to remember that. And when it comes to EdTech tools, we need to be sure we're evaluating these tools against some of the best software that's already been evaluated that we know works for learning. I think a lot about mathematics software because my colleagues, that's one of the areas that we focus on. There are lots of mathematics products and softwares out there that are already working very well for students in classrooms. As we think about AI interventions, which is something that my colleague here, Shayla Kornick, who's in the audience, does a lot of work with EdTech companies on studying AI enhancements to their EdTech products, we need to be asking lots of questions. And primarily, we need to be asking, who is this benefiting? Who is it harming? For what students, under what conditions will this enhancement work for? So lots of questions from me, and I'm sure we'll get to some of those a little bit later as well.
Yeah, maybe not so later. So I'm really glad you brought up guardrails and guidelines. My next question is, if you were stepping up in front of an 11th grade English classroom for this school year, what's a guideline or guardrail you'd put in place around students' use of AI in writing assignments? And maybe more importantly, why?
I can take this one first. When it comes to having students using these tools, first and foremost, we need to be teaching the evaluation of these outputs. Dr. Mishra already said this, but what AI systems produce can oftentimes be false, and we need to teach learners to evaluate critically what those outputs are. And they usually need guidance in this because they often are not subject matter experts, right? You have a fan of Harry Potter going in and prompting ChatGPT for some response about something related to Harry Potter world, they're going to be able to call out those mistakes right away, right? So making sure that they have ways of learning about how incorrect the outputs that are being produced, how to be able to identify those. We call this lateral reading, right? To be able to check other sources to ensure that the outputs are correct. That's primarily what I would be working with students and teachers on, because as adults, we sometimes forget that these tools are not being fact-checked for us as we have been used to in the past, right? In this new world, we need to make sure that we are also doing that evaluation and always keeping front of mind that these are statistical models, right? Those statistical models are pointing out what the highest probability next word is, not necessarily what is correct. It's primarily generating what is most statistically, what the next most statistically significant piece of word is. So human judgment, I guess, is what I'm saying is most important. And then also citing use. So making sure that we're helping them remember that they need to tell us when they're using Gen AI, and we need to be telling them when we're using Gen AI as adults.
Thank you. And agree with all of the above. And I'll just add a couple of things. I think one of the things fundamental in an education system that we don't do is respect the learner. So let's start with that. It doesn't matter whether it's AI or whatever it is, right? So let's start with that. So a consequence of that is complete transparency. Like this is the world we live in. These tools are available. They are good. They are bad. They're, the internet, come on, Wikipedia. There was a time when people were freaking out. Anybody can edit a Wikipedia page, misinformation. We've learned to figure that out. We've learned to figure that world out, and we will figure this out as well. But we will do so in a good educational way only if we maintain that relationship, that transparency about the learning process with the student. Second, this piece about being critical about so this is a term that I've developed, which I hope spreads and goes viral because it's kind of nice, which is think of ChatGPT or generative AI as a smart, drunk, somewhat biased intern. That guy is always there, ready to help. Once in a while, takes a swig from a brown paper bag. So don't trust everything it says, but it's really good in a lot of different things. So learn to keep it as a co-pilot, as what Ethan Malik calls co-intelligence. And I think one of the big things is what I have seen in my working with it. I've been able to write computer code in Python, something I don't know how to do, working computer programs. However, I have no idea if that program is any good or not. Areas in which I have expertise, I've actually become much better. I have been able to do certain things. It's like my dog walking on two legs. It's cute, but it's not consistent, cannot be, So I think helping students understand that you need a modicum of expertise in order to use this tool to the best. I think that's the kind of negotiation and discussion, particularly 11th graders, they are old enough to understand a lot of these things. In fact, I think we can go much younger and have these conversations in authentic ways for that age level, just as we do around the dining table, right? We can have that. And that's how I would approach, I think, an 11th grade writing class.
I'd sign up for that writing class. How about you two?
I really don't have anything to add. I think those were both great perspectives, and I would agree.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what is said, and I remember the Wikipedia is going to ruin everything in education.
Homework is dead.
Right, exactly. And teachers caught on, and they said, no, you can't use Wikipedia as a citation. So if you were even remotely sophisticated as a student, you just looked at the bottom of the Wikipedia page and used those citations, and you got away with it every time. So there's going to be some of that. Are there checkers to make sure that students aren't using AI? Yeah, they exist, and most of them are snake oil. And sure, you can maybe get away with it if you're a teacher and you have a bunch of students who are completely unsophisticated, but they'll catch on and they'll eventually find ways to get around those things. And the technology tools will probably always stay a couple steps ahead of whatever you're using to try to stop the students. So again, we can stand here and try to keep the tide from coming in. And I just don't think that's going to be a very successful approach. Alternatively, we can respect the learner, as one of my co-panelists said, and have a different environment in classrooms that's more collaborative. If teachers can use the AI tools as well to take away some of the drudgery and instead work with students and say, okay, you wrote this essay, but I'm actually going to grade you on what you tell me about it. We're going to have an oral exam and I ask you questions. And if it seems like you actually wrote it and you have a good understanding of the topic because you went through the process of writing this essay, I'll grade you on that. The grade doesn't have to be, red marker on the paper and then you get a big letter at the top. That doesn't have to be the way we do things and hasn't always been the way we've done things in education. So let's move more towards that. But I think the really important point here is the way you ask the question, which is really good, which is, what is the role of the 11th grade English teacher in figuring this out? Not the role, no offense, of the federal government to set regulations and try to lock this in place in 2024 when we're only beginning to understand the implications of this technology. So let's let the teachers teach. Let's let them figure it out on their own, because I think they will. And let's make sure that we are empowering the students to use these tools, not trying to use federal regulations to keep the genie in the bottle.
Yeah, and to be clear, the Center for AI Policy is not taking a position that AI shouldn't be used in education. We're worried about some catastrophic risks from general purpose AI down the road. But I appreciate that. It is ultimately about the teaching, right? Connecting with the students. So we have to be pretty sure that we know what's worth doing before we start mandating that. Along the lines of your comments about there's alternate ways of grading, right? We can give an oral exam, or we can kind of check and see if the student actually understands the material. How many iterations do those alternatives go through, do we think? We're peering a little bit into a crystal ball, but if we start off with, okay, the AI can read the Scantron and figure out, is this multiple choice answer correct? And then maybe it reads an essay and it flags some parts of the essay that might be inaccurate or that might have poor grammar. And then you have a grading tool that suggests some of the topics the teacher might go over with the student. Like, here's some concerns about your writing structure. Then maybe it suggests, oh, well, here's what I would say to the student to help them learn how to write this kind of essay better. At what point is the teacher still in the loop? Or is that an interesting or meaningful question? How much can you automate and still have the teachers connect with their students?
Sure. So some of the work that we've been doing at the Cicero Institute is to look at the growth in K through 12 education of administrators. So if you look back to the 60s, administrators, non-teaching staff, basically all the other adults in the school building who are not teachers have grown exponentially. The number of teachers have grown a bit, the number of students have grown a tiny bit, but teacher pay, dead flat. Academic achievement, dead flat. And so we're doing a lot more stuff in schools, but we're not necessarily getting a better return. In fact, we're getting a far worse return on our educational investment today than we were a couple decades ago, several decades ago. My hope is that AI can help with that by automating some of the rote tasks that teachers are doing and give them better analytics to be able to say, okay, your students are struggling not just with question number 17, but they're struggling with this concept. They're having a challenge coming up with a thesis in their essay. And that can give the teacher insights on what they need to focus more on, and probably can help the student as well discover areas where they're struggling. I don't really know what I'm talking about on this because I'm not a teacher, but fortunately my wife is, and I asked her a lot of these questions. And her view is that these are going to be it's going to be disruptive for schools in general. But there are a lot of opportunities for her to be able to be better engaged with the students individually and to be a better human, not just somebody who is spending most of her time grading and doing other things, writing the lesson plans, doing all the things that I think most teachers don't love doing, when what they really love doing is helping the students and watching them grow through their academic achievement.
There's some amount of automation that frees you up to connect more, is the thought.
Exactly.
Yeah, so the Department of Education came out with a white paper in May of 2023 that was focused on AI and education related topics. And one of the things they talked about was this concept of the teacher in the loop. And their goal, or something they discuss, is why we should always center educators in the center of these loops. They have this acronym called ACE. There's, of course, so many acronyms. But they discuss some examples of what this might look like in the AI context, which is, moment-to-moment decisions that teachers are making in their immediate work of teaching, the preparation and planning and reflection with their teaching, and the professional development aspect. And then also how teachers themselves participate in discussions about the design and the use of these technologies. I think currently there still is quite a bit of lack of public acceptance around these AI technologies, whether it's in the classroom or whether it's in other contexts. And of course, we're still grappling with a lot of concerns. But at the same time, I think when we start to reframe the conversation about the use cases around this towards concepts such as humans in the loop, we begin to allow for more trust over time as we build a greater understanding of how humans themselves can be a part of this process, instead of, defaulting to the threat that AI is going to completely take over education. We see it as a tool rather than something that's going to replace the entire landscape.
So a couple of different ways of sort of thinking about this. So I do want to second what both of you said before. And I think that in some ways we are at a fork in the road where we can use AI to do what we've been doing before, but only faster, better, and maybe worse for our students in some ways. So scripted instructional technology systems which guide you through a path, like the SAT exam. If you get this wrong, we'll give you a slightly easier version. And what the history of intelligent tutoring systems is, students hate it. Mm-hmm. They just basically hate it. They don't appreciate or enjoy. They don't know why they're learning this. The other fork in the road for us, possible path, is to look at this technology as a tool for creativity. So I'll give you a simple example. One of the challenges, this is for teacher preparation, right? One of the challenges that teachers face is students come in to learn science. When they come into the science classroom, they come in with a lot of misconceptions. You can read about them in the abstract. It's another thing to have a student sitting in front of you who has, let's say, a teleological understanding of Darwinian evolution. Till you meet that student, you don't even know how to engage in a conversation. Try this prompt in ChatGPT or any AI tool that you like. Say, I want you to play a 7th grade student who has a teleological understanding of Darwinian. I'm going to play a teacher, and we're going to have a conversation. And I'm going to ask you questions, you're going to reply, we're going to do this for 5 times, and then you'll give me feedback on how well I have done. It's phenomenal. I became a better teacher playing that game a few times, just a short prompt. Now think about a science classroom or some classroom where students are being given agency to ask these questions, to create mathematical models, to do that conversation driven by their personal interests. For once, we have a tool that can allow us to do that. So the question really for us is, do we want to do the same that we have done so far and we know hasn't worked? Or can we truly empower every learner in ways, and we know that the future of this economy, of this country, or whatever the world, is going to be based on innovation, is going to be based on people who can think differently, people who can come up with new ideas. Professions are going to shift dramatically. We have no idea what anybody tells you what they know what the future looks like. They're selling you, I've got a bridge to sell you somewhere, right? And so I think the more we emphasize new ways of thinking, and that might mean transforming schools as we know it. I love the idea of skills-based employment, but how would we evaluate them? There are ways that AI can be used to evaluate creatively rather than sit and lose sleep over plagiarism. That's a non-issue as far as I'm concerned. Plagiarism is a legacy of print. Citations are a legacy of print because I can now point to a book In a world where everything is fluid, it's almost like a digital oral culture. What does that even mean? I think those are important questions for us to ask. And then think about education in that light. And I think that you start thinking of very different models than the ones that we have today.
I agree with what's already been said, and I will add that when we work with edtech developers and think about how they're using AI to innovate, we need to remember that improving learning requires an iterative process, right? And it requires an evidence-based and theory-driven approach. And that's what we need to continue to do when it comes to AI integrations. We're at the very beginning of that, right? With other software that's in classrooms, we've had a longer time to test and ensure that it works for a larger, diverse group of students. So that's one thing I'll say. We're also seeing a lot of innovations within the area of AI, right? We have retrieval augmented generative AI. We have large language models that continue to evolve. We have the smaller language models, right, that might be more appropriate for certain settings and certain uses. So we need to continue to study this. We're at the very beginning of this process. And I will just give you an example of one way that Gen AI was used in a very positive way in a high school classroom out in California. I was working with a teacher who was spending a lot of time supporting her students who were English language learners and her students with disabilities. In order to have fruitful class discussions, she was spending time building out vocab lists for each of these different students. And so one of the ways that she's been able to use generative AI is she's taught the students to themselves generate their own vocab lists for the upcoming class discussion. She collects those lists and reviews those lists for each student, and in that way has offloaded some of this work that Michael was talking about earlier in ways that allow her to do what she does best, which is consult. She's subject matter expert, but she's also teaching the students to use these resources in ways that will serve them well in the future as well.
Interesting. So obviously I agree with you that education is an iterative process, that we need time to adapt to the tools, to figure out the best ways to use them. What happens when the pace of technological change gets inside that decision loop, when the technology available through AI changes more from year to year than the educational policies themselves can change? Even a lot of top corporations are having trouble keeping up with some of the technology. Can we put a chief AI officer in every school building? If not, then how do we cope with this? There's some bills floating around Congress considering various kinds of educational support, to help make AI happen in the classroom. Where could that be most usefully directed? What's needed to keep up with the fast pace of change while still learning how to use the tools?
We're doing a lot of work with district leaders through our League of Innovative Schools. And one of the projects that I referenced earlier was a National Science Foundation project that I led, where I worked with 10 district leaders who are on the cutting edge of integrating AI in their districts. And what we learned is that even they needed a lot of support from researchers, from learning scientists, from core AI experts to make sure that they were interpreting the technology and the learning science and taking into account pedagogy, instructional methods, and making the appropriate adjustments as they gave their community guidance. And one thing that's important to keep in mind is that they're not only developing guidance for their teachers, but also for their students and also for the broader community. We see a lot of families turning to the school districts for guidance on how to integrate or how to use or not use these emerging technologies in their own lives. And so these district leaders worked together, they built off of each other, and what was really nice to see is that there were some who were risk takers and willing to share their rough drafts with everyone else. And that just made everyone else's recommendations and guidelines so much better because they were able to build on and they were able to discuss what changes they were making. The areas that they ended up focusing on were were 5. So in the research, we found 5 areas that these district leaders needed to include in their responsible use policies for the district-wide, and then they tailored these for different audiences later. So first, they wanted to center the importance of development of AI literacy within the community itself, the teachers, students, families, ensuring safety, which has already been discussed, understanding the ethics behind the implementation of AI and ensuring responsible, fair use. Transparency, and by transparency, they meant being transparent with the community about what tools they were allowing the use of when it came to AI enhancements and which ones they weren't and why, so that folks could engage in a process and discuss it. And also transparency when they did change their responsible use guidelines, right? Because if a new guideline came up, they wanted to be able to explain why they were bringing that into the conversation. They wanted to include more professional learning supports and guiding language. So again, this gets back to guiding language and examples were super important, and we still need to be developing those. So that was implementation guidelines. And then finally, evaluation and impact. So again, coming back to the question, who is this tool beneficial for? Who might it be causing harm to? And what do we need to keep in mind to ensure responsible use of this tool in this context?
Thank you. I'm going to take a slightly different tack because I am in a college of teacher preparation. So I think firstly, I really agree with the thing that, we shouldn't be looking at policies at this point, particularly when things are changing so fast. So thinking more in terms of guidelines so that we can be more nimble, because it can do X today and it'll do X plus Y plus Z and more, right? So that's one. But thinking of, like, let's say if a systemic issue challenge that teachers face is that couple of challenges. One, it's one person in front of 25, 30 kids. You have to be everything for every kid over there, right? Somebody needs support on math and social emotional development and so on. And then we put more and more demands. Second, teaching is one of the only professions where day 1 is the same as day 3,000. You're in front of a bunch of kids. There is no space for growth and expertise. So one of the things we have been doing at our college, and I really recommend everybody look this up, it's called the Next Education Workforce, which is saying that can we reimagine schools and teachers to be an array of adults around an array of students, so that you can see the benefits of that. Because one of the things we talk about is this idea of distributed expertise. And now you have AI where some of the expertise is distributed in that shape and form. So you can start thinking, so the issue of having an AI officer sort of goes by the wayside because you respect the fact that different people in that team will have that distributed expertise, and AI will have a critical role to play in that space, not the only role. So you still keep the human touch, you keep all of those. So I really recommend that if you're interested in this work, look, I don't lead that work, but I really value and appreciate, and it's spreading quite a bit across the nation and worldwide, this idea of the next education workforce. But AI to me can play a very critical role in this new model.
Thank you. Yeah, I wanted to dive in a little bit more detail about your first comment about how the technology is changing so rapidly we need guidelines rather than policies. Do we think the pace of change will slow down at some point, or is it all guidelines from here on out?
I think we'll have a better understanding of how to develop those recommendations. There has been a shift, though, when it comes to districts, the way districts talk about this. They've moved from acceptable use policies, which were the rules, like what can't be done, right? And they've moved to responsible use. So a more guidelines and guardrails approach where there are expectations and there are guidelines, and we're asset framing this, right? So that students and teachers can have more responsible digital footprints, right? And so I think there's been a shift when it comes to the way districts are addressing this to begin with. So I wonder if we will continue to see this down the line, the guidelines and guardrails and iteration on that.
Stress the values and what you're looking for, not just what's against the rules.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Can I just build on that a little bit? Just one thing. I think the emphasis really needs to be on building resilient systems.
Mm-hmm.
We just went through a global pandemic where everything shut down, and suddenly we're like, we've literally, I mean, I do research in Edtech. It was amazing to me that we completely forgot everything that we knew about online learning because we just went into this sort of emergency mode. But there were schools, there were districts, and we have them documented who responded to the pandemic very differently, took it as a challenge, didn't let, that last kid fall through the cracks, all of that. So they had built what were resilient systems before the pandemic. And AI is just going to be one of the many disruptions coming. I mean, we have global climate change, we have this, we have that. I mean, we don't need to go through that list, especially sitting in this building here with its, the long history and what we have seen of the world, right? So the pressure to build systems which will reorganize around these challenges as they appear, that's the challenge for us, really. So policies, guidelines are not the issue as much as the structures and institutions that we build.
Okay, I like that reframe. How about the two of you? Thoughts on those series of questions?
Yeah, so I just want to add, I think, as we look to build these more resilient systems, I think industry can play a pivotal role in ensuring that educators feel confident and empowered in their understanding of these tools so that can inform teacher policies and district policies on how they are individually looking to approach this. At SIIA, we have a set of Edtech principles that we've developed with industry partners that focus on where the Edtech industry can help with this. So we think that the Edtech industry should support efforts to prepare existing and future educators with courses and professional development to help them feel comfortable navigating this rapid pace of change. We think that industry is really excited to continue working with educators about this. Or along these lines, and we think that as we continue to develop these critical skills around understanding this technology, I think industry wants to be a part of those conversations and can definitely help in building that resiliency.
So there are challenges due to the fact that the pace of change, I think, will continue. At best, it will continue to be very quick. It will very likely only accelerate. And again, there are a couple of things that we can do about that. Let's take a look at some previous examples. So nuclear power. What we decided to do is build an entire federal agency around the idea that we wanted nuclear power. We just wanted it to be safe. And the result of that is we stopped designing nuclear plants in the 50s and 60s. We stopped building them in the 70s. And we've learned a lot since then, but we basically get to take none of that knowledge and employ it in the real world. We can't use nuclear energy to solve climate change. And it's just kind of at a total standstill. In America, our adversaries, of course, are building, and those policies have done very little on proliferation. Another example where we didn't do that, fortunately, is in the personal computing revolution, where the government's policy under the Clinton administration was we want to have very heavy government regulation on anything to do with encryption, and essentially the government needs to get a backdoor to your personal computer for anything that's encrypted. And that was going to be the policy of the federal government. And fortunately, that was abandoned. And now, because of that, I don't think if that hadn't been abandoned, I don't think we'd be talking about AI today. And fortunately, we have the internet, we have computers in our pockets, and it is affordable, it's cheap, and it's safe because the innovation led to greater safety. I think that is what will happen in AI as well. We can start with our worst fears, but I think that's only going to lead us down a path of we have to try to put this in a regulatory box. If the belief, and it sounds like there's unanimous belief at this table, that the pace of change is going to be very rapid. Unfortunately, the pace of policymaking is quite slow. So if we try to put policy on top of this incredibly dynamic technology, all it's going to do is slow us down to the detriment of students, to the detriment of our workforce, and our adversaries are probably not going to do some of those things, and so it'll only make us less competitive around the world.
All right, thank you. So I want to turn things over to questions from the audience. I'm especially interested, because we are in this august building, In questions about policy and laws, what do you need to know from these educational experts to advocate for the best possible set of government policies on AI in education? But we'll take other questions too. And if you can, please identify what office or what group you're from when you ask your question. So just raise your hand if you have a question.
Hi, I'm Christina Supe. I'm from Right Together AI, and I have a question. A few of you mentioned access and equity, and I really have been contemplating the historical implications of this, that literacy in general has been used to preserve power, and some groups have not had access on purpose. And then we add in like good schools or cutting edge, and the sentiment of the leadership within a district is really going to determine access because funding is going to go certain directions in those districts, right? If I have a cutting edge superintendent, I'm going to fund this, and if I don't, I won't. And then what happens to those kids in the pipeline and the workforce? And I'm not sure that policy or federal policy on that is something that would be to consider, but equity of access is just going to be a major issue because we don't have a wonderful track record of literacy with some groups, and we haven't sorted that out yet. And so I'm just curious as to what the panel thinks about that issue.
Okay. Any takers?
So we definitely agree with you, and we focus on meeting the needs of historically and systematically excluded learners, which means that not only do we work with the League of Innovative Schools, which I mentioned earlier, but we also have a group of schools, VILs, serving mostly Title I communities, historically and systematically excluded communities. We work closely with them and believe that it's important to develop AI literacy. And I love that you bring up the complications of that word, right? We certainly don't advocate for standalone AI literacy. We advocate for the integration of AI literacy across the curriculum and to ensure that it's also being that it's building that we know that we're building on existing literacies like the 21st century skills, as well as digital media literacy, digital media readiness, and that we are centering justice in our use of AI. We've worked closely with the Kapoor Center and with Allison Scott and Shayna White, who have this idea of ensuring that we're centering justice as we think about how we're helping learners and their communities develop the skills that are necessary to enable them to critically understand, use, and be able to evaluate these systems and tools, because we do agree that this digital world is constantly changing, and we all need to be able to develop those skills, including the families and the wider school communities. And so there are certain skills and practices that we advocate for the development of that do draw on those foundational literacy skills that are already being taught in schools, and we recommend that these be integrated throughout the curriculum. My colleague Kelly Mills back there, co-author of our AI literacy position paper, which is just available at digitalpromise.org/AI literacy. You'll see those specific skills and practices that we advocate for and how we recommend that be done throughout the curriculum, because we do know that there is a lot of attrition in schools, a lot of children changing districts and schools, and so we want to make sure that there's some continuity in their ability to develop and have access to these skills, right? So we want it to be cumulative and consistent for them in their learning experiences.
I can just add one thing to this. I think this issue of equity is critical, and I think that AI literacy, or whatever we want to call that, needs to understand how these tools are trained. There is a whole ethical issue about like whose content. I mean, you can actually look up how much of your content, and it was 0.00001% of OpenAI's training was on my website, which was kind of cool. They need to send me like 5 cents or something. But there is a broader issue of the civics of technology that we need to bring into our educational conversation. And I won't go on in depth in that, but I really do want to give a shout out to the Civics of Technology project. You can look that up. My friends Dan Krutka and Marie Heath. And I really recommend looking at that as a way of thinking about educators developing a broader sort of array of skills about how to talk about these issues in sort of K-12 contexts.
Yeah.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for being here. Jake Easter from the Senate Health Committee Minority. I'm curious. I appreciate the panel's near unanimous call for guidelines as opposed to hard regulation or policy. But my question is sort of like, what from the panel's perspective would be the most trusted source to sort of craft those? Is that letting the states, I think 23 states up to this point have issued K-12 education guidelines. Like, is that the authoritative source the panel thinks would be where to look, or is that something greater? Is that federal level? Who in the federal government? There's all kinds of organizations and agencies that deal with that sort of thing. So I'm curious, like, who does the panel trust when it comes to crafting those guidelines?
I trust teachers and I trust parents. And so I think there's, maybe I disagree with my colleagues on the panel a little bit because, yes, I certainly said no regulations, you don't need to pass federal laws. I know there's this instinct on the Hill and in DC more broadly. I've worked in federal government, I worked in a state government. I get it. There's this idea that, well, we have to do something. We have to pass a bill. You actually don't. You actually really don't. You could start with the appropriations bills. That'd be nice. But aside from the need to talk about it, we should inform policymakers. We should make sure there's an understanding of what's happening. And I think policymakers would benefit from using these tools, both because I think it would help them with their work and it would give them a better understanding. So if you're not using these tools already, that's the best way to learn, really. But in terms of does there need to be federal regulations, a bill passed, guidelines? No, there really doesn't, because those things are going to lag the technology by months, if not years, by the time they're actually agreed upon, go through committees, or released. They're just going to be out of date before they're released. It's better to leave it to the people who are on the ground having to figure these problems out with students side by side, and let them come to some common understanding. And the teachers who get it right should be rewarded to help teach their peers and to have those best practices spread. But those best practices shouldn't be codified into law because, again, the best practice today will probably not be the best practice a year from now or even 6 months from now. So we have to continue to evolve. The best way to do that is to build that from the classroom up, not from the federal government down.
I think AI technologies should definitely currently adhere to existing state and federal laws to ensure that the security and privacy of student data is acknowledged, and we need to uphold existing laws to protect civil rights. Obviously, I think looking forward to what we could do in the future, I think it's still going to require a collaborative approach across policymakers, the education community, and industry. The Department of Education has done some work around, engaging in the topic through guidance and white papers, and not endorsing that needs to be the only source. I think the work that they've been doing is valuable. I think the extent to which the federal government maybe chooses to expand its involvement, it really is important to that any sort of regulations would still allow for the flexibility and innovation at the local level to ensure that AI technologies can be adapted to meet the specific needs of diversified communities and districts and states all across the country.
So, Michael, I think you and I agree on one thing and we'll disagree on one, I'm pretty sure. So the thing that we agree on is that in terms of educational policy, I think, yes, absolutely. Leave it to the teachers, leave it to the kids. They will figure it out. As an educator, we have faced lots of things come along and we figure it out, right? Honestly, that's how I think about our profession. We don't get paid a lot. I mean, when I say we, I mean K-12 teachers. But we deal with it. We figure out ways to, whether it's gun control, whether it's this or that, we deal with it. So I'm not worried about educators. What I am concerned about, honestly, and I wrote a blog post about it called the sort of unfairness of the ethical discussion in the AI debate. In October of 2022, how many of us were sitting and waiting for a chatbot to emerge? Who gave the right to OpenAI to do a global experiment with a technology which even they understood was not ready for prime time? If I have to interview you to write a journal article, I have to get IRB permission so that I don't cause you or anybody else harm. So I think there needs to be policy. And I say that with real some passion in my voice because I remember myself in 2007, 2008 doing research on teachers using social media, how they can use it in their classroom. And I was blind. I did not see, and I should have, because that's my expertise, that's my job. The wonderful things that came out of it, but also the terrible things that came out of it. And I do wish Congress had acted on that. I do wish we had had more discussions about how more extreme content is leading to more engagement, how these devices are being designed to sucker us in. And now we are having conversation nationally about cell phone bans. Why did we reach this position? That's what I worry about AI. It's not our teachers. We will figure it out. We always have. That's our strength. The question is, who is given 5, 6 men who have been trained in a certain particular way about technologies and society and the world to decide how this technology is used and promoted across the globe? Why is there not a deeper, bigger conversation about that? That's where I think we need to have. I don't know whether it's, I'm not an expert on this. Trust me, I am not a legislator. I'm an academic. But I look at what's happened to our teenagers. I look at the conversations that are happening in the public sphere, and I wonder what kinds of decisions could we have made? And what can we learn from that to think ahead?
Can I respond to that?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I do think we agree on a lot, but the best way to lock in the groups that are leading right now and ensure that they are always the monopolistic leaders is to heavily regulate this and say we cannot have any models, AI models, bigger than this. We cannot have we can't go down this road. We can't go down that road. The effect of that will be to limit competition. You pass very stringent regulations on banks. We don't start banks anymore. You have very stringent regulations on energy generation. Same thing. That will be the effect, is to lock in of just a couple players, and there are those players are, by no coincidence, on Capitol Hill today lobbying for regulation. And a lot of people are saying, "Wow, isn't that great? Even the businesses want regulation." No, they want the regulation because it will lock them in as the dominant player and will make anybody who comes along and tries to disrupt what they're doing. If you don't like what they're doing, start an AI company. But if there's heavy regulation and we have to go ask permission from someone, I guess I would love to know who would these companies go ask permission to start an AI company. And how in the world would those people know better than the people who are starting the companies?
Well, I'm no expert.
What gives them the right?
No,
You said what
absolutely.
gives these companies right. What would give anybody else the right?
I
to
think
tell
the
them no?
things that we can do is ask for greater transparency in the design of these models. For instance, you had some examples here which we never got into, that these companies which are saying student tests can be evaluated by AI now. We have incredible amount of research to show that the simple inclusion of one word in an essay, whether the student like rap music or classical music, biases the output of these AI algorithms.
Well,
I
of
think-
course, because it's trained on what exists already. But I'm curious. You said there should be these companies should have to ask permission from some other.
No.
body.
I'm not saying permission. I'm saying that can we have some more transparency about how these models are trained? For instance, Khan-Migo is based on ChatGPT.
Yeah.
We are showing that ChatGPT is biased, but many of these edtech companies won't allow us to even know which models they're using. I'm not asking them to change anything. Just be open about what they are using.
Would you be more likely to use a model that was open about its model and the way it was developed than one that was not.
As a researcher, at least I would be able to go investigate and find out how good or bad these models are.
Me
and
too.
I could be able to
I think
report
most
that to the
consumers
world.
would feel the same way, and my guess is,
Yeah.
as long as
So
consumers
I am
continue to
not.
voice that,
I'm
it'll-
not trying to constrain the industry. Don't get me wrong. I think it's amazing. I love these tools and technologies. They have made me very happy for the last 3 years playing with them. Trust me, and I see great potential in its educational practice. And I love the fact, Bethany, that you brought up example of print and film and so on, right? There's this great quote by Thomas Edison where he says that film is going to transform education, and everybody uses that quote as a way of saying, like, oh, either he was misguided or like education is so set in stone, nothing can change it. But film did change education. There's a reason why after the growth of mass media, you have the movements against colonialism, you have the rise of democracy across the world, you have the rise of fascism, all of the above, popular culture, it transformed our life and hence transformed our classroom. Whether or not a teacher working with me in 2008 used social media or not, social media today is present in the classroom. That's what I think about. I think those are the questions we need to be thinking about in terms of policy, not policing particular teachers saying you can do X or Y. But as a society, we are not having a conversation about the long-term impact of these technologies, which are going to be incredibly one-on-one, personal. That's another can of worms that I haven't had a chance to talk about. But seriously, that's the conversation I would love to have.
All right, let's get a quick thought from Dr.
Sorry,
Ruiz. It's
yeah.
all fascinating, but it would take more time than we have.
I just want to bring it back to the teachers and the students. And we want to make sure that our teachers are able to model responsible use of these technologies for their learners. Some of them are able to do that on their own, but many of them need guidance. And when we work at the school and district level, we see that there needs to be some guidance from the state level, from the SIIA, the LEA. But then not all states have their own guidance at this point, and many states are still looking to the national government for guidance and the Office of Edtech specifically. And so I do think it's important for us to work across these systems to make sure that those teachers who are on the ground are getting the supports that they need in whatever way makes sense for them so that they can make those adjustments that they need to meet the needs of their unique communities.
Really quickly. Hi, Dr. Bridget Myers. I'm an Educational Technology Manager with DC Public Schools. And I wanted to jump in just right after your comment because we are like the boots on the ground in K-12 education. And so you spoke a little bit earlier. Well, first thing is you called out a website and we didn't quite catch it. So can you call that?
digitalpromise.org/AI literacy.
Got it. Thank you. I love Digital Promise. But I think to speak to what you just said, what we are seeing when we go into these schools, and what I am most concerned about is really this gap, right? We talk a lot about like digital equity, but it's real, and it doesn't just exist with our students, it exists with our teachers. And so what we're working on now, and just to really quickly put it out there, like we in DCPS we do have our guidelines and guardrails, and we are calling what we call a learning stance. We're taking a learning stance when it comes to AI. So we're not saying don't use AI, we're saying here's how you can. And I think with us, again, like earlier you spoke about, marginalized communities and which students this is actually harming and helping. That's our work. That's where we exist. And I think a lot of times we hear these buzzwords, right, digital equity, and we talk about like the what, but we don't necessarily always get to the how. And so you talked about like these different skills and things like that. And so that is actually where we're really focusing on. And so, myself and my colleagues will be here today because that is the work that we do. It's really not about, we understand AI and machine learning and how it, farms this data, but that's not where our teachers and our students are. And so for us, the work is explaining to teachers what AI looks like, what it feels like, or how it works for them when they're planning a lesson, and what it looks like for a student in a chair in a classroom. And so that's where we do the work, and I think a lot of times we have these conversations. I just want to caution that we don't get so in the clouds, especially when we're having K-12 conversations, because what really matters is in that seat in the classroom. And so just one example, we recently, our team did a session on using AI in the writing process, because again, If you tell kids not to do something, what are they going to do? They're going to do it. So we're not telling you not to use AI, but we're going to give you some resources on how to use it as a tool in your learning. So, of course, we don't want you to plagiarize an entire essay, right? But we're going to say, okay, you're an 8th grader who has a writing prompt that you have to do. Let's go ahead and start the writing process with your essay. But here's how you can use AI in the process. In your pre-writing process, you may want to use this tool to do X, Y, Z. Because what we don't want to do, again, is leave our students behind. Like, AI is out here, it's in the world, so we can't shield them from it, but we don't want you to continue to get further and further behind. So we're going to give you resources, and we're going to give you ways to use it as a tool in your process of learning, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Helping teachers help students to be able to use these systems and tools to meet their needs and to learn how to use them, because they will need to continue to use them as they enter workforce, as they go on to college. And there are really good examples of how teachers have done this and embedded these systems and tools into their lessons, both at the middle school, high school, and higher ed level. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I'm thrilled to see that there's still so much energy in the room. Unfortunately, our hour is over, so we're going to take a quick photo shoot, and then we have the room for a little while longer so people can mingle, ask questions one-on-one with the panelists, if the panelists are gracious enough to stick around. The Center for AI Policy has prepared a report with some footnotes on AI in education. I hear footnotes are obsolete. We didn't get the memo. And also, you can subscribe to our newsletter if you just put your email on the sign-up sheets outside the door. Thank you so much for coming, and thank you to our panelists.